Today on the Frontline Health podcast.
Say that only 55% of the 22 drug approval studies were actually done with randomized clinical trials, which, if you know anything about trials, that is the gold standard of doing any type of study because nobody knows what they're getting. They took that out of the picture. They didn't even use them in these products that they brought to market. So it's really kind of disturbing when you know that they're more than likely going to make millions upon millions of dollars with these products coming to market, and that there was only one study done, and that most of those studies that were done were not even randomized controlled clinical trials.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Frontline Health podcast by Centurion, where we help you take your ownership of your health through health tips, news, and insights. My name is Evan Patrick. With me is Troy Duell, our founder and CEO here at Centurion Health. How are you doing today?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and we're here with another episode of Health Headline Highlights. So we're going to be looking at everything from microplastics to cholesterol to even a little bit of pickleball.
That's a pretty wide variety of topics, but there was a lot that went on in the month of February leading up to where we are now. So some very, very interesting topics for sure.
There sure are. So why don't you get us kicked off with our first article, Troy?
All right. Well, this article is Microplastic Found in Brain Weighs as Much as a Plastic Spoon Study. Could microplastics be linked to health issues such as dementia? I think this goes without saying. It was a pretty stunning highlight when you hear that there are microplastics in your brain that could weigh as much as a plastic spoon. And it actually came out of a study done by Nature Medicine, that journal, and they found that microplastics tend to be accumulating in our brains, and they kind of get past the blood-brain barrier. And they're not real sure why or how it happens, but they did this study between 2016 and 2024, and they found that those microplastics, the level has increased by 50% with some of those samples. And then they found people who had dementia seemed to have even higher plastic concentrations in their brain, leading to even more inflammation in their brain. So kind of a crazy article to start off with. And one of the things that I took out of that was they believe that these microplastics, why we're getting so many, is because it's in our food, in our water, and in our air. And we've got to be very, very careful with the amount of plastics that seem to be coming into our food supply and to our waters.
Yeah, this is pretty crazy, Troy. A few days ago, you walked over to me at my desk and you shared with me just this really, really alarming fact that we learned from this study, and that's that most people have the equivalent of a plastic spoon worth of plastic in their brain. And that's just hard, to even fathom. I've been aware of microplastics. It's obviously a hot button topic, but I just assumed it's sitting in my gut. There's maybe some getting in my bloodstream, and it's causing fatigue or just lethargy or something like that. But never did I imagine that those microplastics would actually be making it to my brain.
Yeah, and because this study concentrated solely on the brain, are there microplastics that are still sitting in the gut, that are still sitting in other areas of our body, just kind of floating around? But the fact that it is the equivalent of a plastic spoon in my brain just really kind of blew me away, and something that hopefully we're going to dive into on some later podcast and find out a little bit more about it.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack with that. We started looking at just different products that we use. You mentioned your tea bags of the tea that you like, and just all kind of different food products, ways that we store our food, and that was the main thing that I certainly thought about. But there are even some other things that we've discovered, like our water supply and environmental factors, even airborne microplastics. Just crazy things. So stay tuned for a future podcast episode where we will definitely dive a lot more into the world of microplastics. Our next health headline has to do with what's going on in the White House. So President Trump plans to expand access to in vitro fertilization, often shortened to IVF. Some highlights from President Trump's plan: he plans to lower costs and reduce barriers to getting IVF. He wants to support American families who are struggling to conceive. And he also signed a provision that enables parents to withdraw up to $5,000 from retirement accounts without penalty when they give birth or adopt a child. Now, this all sounds great on the surface level, right? Giving people access to fertility treatments, supporting parents, and all that. It sounds very pro-family, but IVF has been a controversial issue in the past, and definitely still is, particularly among Christian circles. So why are some Christians against IVF? And as someone who creates products to help couples conceive, where do you stand on this issue?
It is, like you said, an extremely sensitive issue, because so many people have had children through IVF, and it makes it much more emotional because there are things there. But I think if we step back and we look at the science of it, where most of the issues come up when you're talking about IVF is when they take the egg and they make a child and they fertilize it and they leave it in a dish. They typically are taking 10 to 20 sometimes eggs, fertilizing all of them, and then freezing them. Once they get a child or they get 2 children, then they discard all the other eggs that have been fertilized. And I think there are ways that we can make this a much more acceptable format, which is just do one at a time and try to get that cost piece out and start looking at it as though, if as a Christian you believe that life begins at conception, then to be able to follow through with that and understand that, hey, yes, I want a child, but we need to go one at a time, or we have 2 total at a time and you want to have both children, then that's good. But it comes to the fact of discard, and that's where some of these issues come into play. I vaguely remember an article about someone carrying a set of fertilized eggs in a fertility clinic, and she ended up falling and they dropped, and she ended up getting sued because basically the defendant said that it was murder, that their children were killed on the floor. So it's a very sensitive subject, but again, I think there is a lot of good that can come from the IVF with children, but we just can tweak a couple of things to make it that much better, because if we're not careful, we're right on the verge of what the Nazis were doing in Germany during the 30s and 40s with trying to mess with different things and come up with which kids they want to keep and which ones they don't. So eugenics is not far from that scene.
Yeah, so definitely a very fine line there. And I know even on the state level in Alabama, you talk about all the the moral and ethical dilemmas and spiritual dilemmas, but there's so many legal ramifications for hospitals who would want to do something like this. I know Alabama has passed certain laws that hospitals have reacted to recently, where they have stopped IVF treatments, I think in reaction to the legal precedent set by the case that you just mentioned. And so definitely a lot there. And we'll continue to keep an eye on IVF and what develops with this in our country.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a highly sensitive issue on both sides, and it's not as easy as just doing one thing or the other with it, unfortunately. Our next headline is, in 2022, most drugs were approved based on a single study. This one really kind of blew my mind. It said 65% of those drugs in 2022 were approved to come to market based on one single study. In 2016, kind of giving you some, I guess, another year that they looked at it, in 2016, just 20% of drugs that came to market were approved on a single study. And what they found, that even in that case, 25% of those 65% drugs were actually studied only by the manufacturers themselves. So nobody else was involved.
So they're extremely trustworthy.
Oh, absolutely. Because they have no vested interest, right? There's
no financial interest there.
None. And then it went on to say that only 55% of the 22 drug approval studies were actually done with randomized clinical trials, which, if you know anything about trials, that is the gold standard of doing any type of study, because nobody knows what they're getting. They took that out of the picture. They didn't even use them in these products that they brought to market. So it's really kind of disturbing when you know that they're more than likely going to make millions upon millions of dollars with these products coming to market, and that there was only one study done, and that most of those studies that were done were not even randomized controlled clinical trials. So what do you think, as we kind of get to the end of this, do you think that RFK Jr., as he steps into this new role at HHS, and you're hearing all this hype of the FDA, is this one of those areas that you think he's going to come in and make a difference or make any changes?
Yeah, I guess my hope would just be that we hold pharmaceutical companies to the same standard that we hold supplements. We talk about all the regulation that there is by the FDA currently on the supplement industry, and there should be oversight. There should be, but clearly it hasn't worked with all of the supplements out there that we see that are just not actually doing things the right way. Maybe they're manufacturing overseas, and what the customer gets in the bottle is not what's actually advertised. We've even also seen stories recently of just people who have been easily scamming people through supplements that are not what they're advertised to be. So there's definitely a lot of changes that need to be made there. But my hope is that RFK continues to promote different supplements that address nutritional needs and that kind of thing, and take kind of a more proactive approach to people's health, like we encourage people to do, that we would look at pharmaceuticals in the same light and with the same level of scrutiny.
So true. I think if we could get back to an individualized care as opposed to looking at everybody as a whole, kind of one of the things that you made me think of was the whole folic acid, and putting folic acid in all of our foods and bread and pastas and everything else, instead of looking at it and going, all right, there are individual people who need these certain things.
Yeah.
We're going to give it to the whole mass. And I think we've seen lots of issues when that's come up.
Yeah. Our next article is one that I have a bittersweet relationship with, and it has to do with the sport of pickleball, which as a tennis player, I have to say I'm not a fan of. So in some ways, I thought this article was humorous, but I'll try not to give the pickleballers too hard of a time on this one. The headline is "Pickleball Injuries Are on the Rise. Here is how to prevent them." So some highlights that I found from this article. One, not surprising, pickleball has become one of the fastest growing sports in America, with the number of players rising from 4.8 million in 2021 to 8.9 million in 2023. Over 2 years, we have seen the number of people playing pickleball double.
But at least they're outside and they're doing something.
They are outside.
So we should encourage
and
that.
They're doing something. And what was encouraging to me is that adults over 55 make up the largest demographic of pickleball players. I laugh at my friends who are in their 20s and 30s who, like, they see, like, they've started playing pickleball as their form of exercise. I'm like, just learn tennis. Like, pickleball is going to be your preferred form of exercise, and I could go on for days just about the pickleball pandemic, if you will. According to a recent study by the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, there was a 90-fold increase in pickleball-related fractures, with a noticeable surge from 2020 onward, where fractures doubled. And the most common pickleball-related injuries include ankle injuries, knee pain, hamstring injuries, and elbow pain. So Troy, my question for you is, should pickleball, quote-unquote, athletes be training outside of their court time for pickleball injury prevention?
It seems like you have a bias against pickleball, just a small bias against it.
I won't fight you on that.
Yeah, but the answer is yes. I think with anything where we're getting out and there is competition involved, strength training is always going to help. Working out before, getting some cardiovascular exercise, and certainly warming up and stretching, especially if the average age is 55 and above.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're stretching and you're doing everything you can to limit those injuries. So, and as we've talked about plenty on the Frontline Health podcast, diet is also a part of that. So don't go eating horribly and then trying to go out and work out. That will certainly not help.
Yeah. And I think this really just speaks to the idea that our bodies were meant to move in a variety of ways. If you just do one thing and it's just repetitive over and over and over again, it takes a toll on your body. It's not only important for people for like older adults who are playing pickleball, but that's also important for kids playing sports and that kind of thing as well.
That's right. All right, our next headline, heartburn medication may increase dementia risk. And the sub-headline says, proton pump inhibitors are being overprescribed and putting patients at risk, experts say. I'm not a big fan of when experts say, but one of the things that this article did talk about was it seems that if people have taken proton pump inhibitors or PPIs for over 4.4 years, there was a 33% higher risk of developing dementia. They did find that short-term use appeared to be safer, but they also suggested from previous studies that they could even have some issues with cognitive function. Now, the downside to this study and what they used is it was all self-reported. So it means that they may not have added in the OTC proton pump inhibitors. So a lot of people use those and they're not considering that as part of their daily regimen, or it may even seem that they're inflating some of their issues with their cognitive health. So that's the one downside to this study. So it's not a perfect study, but I think it is certainly something that should help us take pause, look at it and go, is this really something that I need from the standpoint of my health, or are there ways that we can change that? Yeah.
So if there are heartburn medications that have these potentially harmful side effects, what can people do to reduce heartburn while avoiding these potentially harmful medications?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some simple things you can do, like weight loss. So that's the number one thing you can do really to help reduce some of the reflux that's going on, because we know if you're slimmer and you're not overweight, there's less of a chance of you having that reflux. You can also avoid, if you start taking notice of the foods that you're eating that cause the most heartburn, then start eliminating those from your diet and use common sense. If you know that you go out and you eat those nuclear wings and it causes you to have heartburn, well, don't eat the nuclear wings anymore. That's the key. And then finally, you can always sleep with your head elevated if you know that you've had a food that's going to cause that. So sleep with your head up. That'll help reduce some of that as well.
Yeah, I like to be able to taste my food personally, so I just avoid the nuclear wings. If there's a little bit of spice, like maybe some buffalo, that's as spicy as I want it to be.
I'm right there with you. Right there with you.
Our final health headline for today, cholesterol could boost your body's cancer-fighting abilities. Mount Sinai researchers discover cholesterol's critical role in enhancing immune cells' ability to detect and fight cancer. Some highlights from this article. Cholesterol enhances cancer-fighting immune cells. This was from a study from Mount Sinai's School of Medicine, and it found that cholesterol is essential for the maturation and function of dendritic cells. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's good.
They help the body detect and fight cancer. These immune cells also act as scouts, identifying cancer cells and alerting the immune system. Their growth and communication depend on cholesterol-fueled processes. And so we see these benefits in cancer prevention and also in immunity related to cholesterol. Troy, I personally love a classic American breakfast. And for that reason, just about every single morning, I am cooking some eggs sunny side up on my stovetop. And I've always heard mixed opinions about eggs because they have cholesterol. So am I boosting my immunity and helping to prevent cancer by eating eggs every morning, or is this bad for me and going to cause issues down the road?
Well, it was probably not even 15, 20 years ago, eggs were getting a really, really bad rap. And I think that's why this headline stood out to us a lot, was the fact that now they're saying cholesterol can actually cure cancer, when for 30 years they said cholesterol is bad, you need to stay away from it, don't even get near it. Well, to answer your question, eggs are actually really good. What they found is that cholesterol really has less to do with the food that we eat. So you're not getting it from that, but your liver is what is creating that cholesterol. And the liver will create it based on the saturated fats or the trans fats that you're consuming. So if you eat an egg, there's only 1.5 grams of fat in there, which means you're really not going to get that much cholesterol being produced from your liver. And the cholesterol you do get is actually the good cholesterol. So eggs have the HDL cholesterol instead of the LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, the one that we want to avoid altogether.
So are the benefits that are discussed in this article about cholesterol's cancer-fighting capabilities and immune strengthening capabilities, are these benefits connected to both HDL and LDL cholesterol, or just to one of them?
Really just to the HDL side. So the LDL is still bad. We know that it's going to help, or it is part of the process that creates that plaque on our blood vessels that can then break off and cause stroke or cardiovascular disease. So we want to limit that LDL, which means you've got to limit the trans fats and the saturated fats in your diet in order to make sure that the HDL is continuing to rise and get what you need.
Well, thank you for that advice, Troy. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Frontline Health podcast by Centurion. That's all for today, and we encourage you, as always, go out and take ownership of your health today, because you are your best health advocate. Until next time. If you enjoyed what you heard today on the podcast, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. We would love to hear your comments or questions about anything we've talked about on the show. For more health news, tips, and insights, follow us at Centurion Health on Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube. And for safe, effective, and affordable healthcare products made in the USA to help you elevate your health and life, visit Centurion.health. We look forward to you joining us next time on the Frontline Health podcast by Centurion.